The air hangs thick with centuries of silence. A weight settles on the shoulders of history, a question lingering just beneath the surface of familiar stories. What if the narrative we've inherited, the one etched into stained glass and whispered in Sunday sermons, isn't the complete picture? It began long ago, before the neatly bound volumes, before the established canon, with voices struggling to be heard amidst the rising tide of a new faith. Early Christians weren't united on every detail. The memory of Jesus, even within his own circle, was fluid, shaped by personal encounters and immediate needs. Accounts varied, tales of miracles, discussions about his teachings, differing interpretations of his message. These weren't immediately written down as formalized gospels. They were passed orally, evolving with each telling, carried on the tongues of devoted followers. Then came the scribes, the compilers, tasked with preserving these nascent traditions. But how do you select which stories hold true? Which voices deserve to be enshrined alongside others? The task was far from simple, a delicate balancing act between loyalty and dissent, faith and reason. Think about it. Jesus himself challenged existing norms, disrupted established power structures. His followers, too, wrestled with the implications of his message. Their interpretations weren't monolithic. They were shaped by their own experiences, backgrounds, and perspectives. The Gospels we read today, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, are not simply verbatim transcriptions of Jesus' words and deeds. They are carefully crafted narratives, filtered through the lens of their respective authors, reflecting the beliefs and priorities of their communities. Each presents a slightly different version of the same man, offering unique insights into his life and teachings. Consider Mark, often considered the earliest gospel. It's terse, action-oriented, focusing on Jesus' deeds rather than lengthy discourses. Compare that to John, rich in theological reflection, exploring deeper spiritual truths. Notice the subtle shifts in emphasis, the differing accounts of key events. This wasn't a chaotic free-for-all. There were rules, unspoken though they may have been. A gospel needed to align with core Christian beliefs: love, forgiveness, sacrifice. But it also had to be accessible and understandable to the wider community. The early church debated fiercely about these matters. Different factions championed different narratives, each convinced of its own righteousness. The process of canonization was a slow, arduous one, a series of compromises and power plays that ultimately shaped the books we now consider sacred. It wasn't a moment of decisive judgment, but rather a gradual accumulation of acceptance, driven by both theological conviction and practical considerations. So, let's pause for a moment. If everything you've been taught about the Bible is only half the story, what other chapters remain hidden within its pages? And who decided which ones were deemed worthy of preservation, and which weren't? The debates continued, simmering beneath the surface of early Christian communities. Not everyone agreed on the core tenets, not even within the established Gospels. Interpretations fractured along regional lines and philosophical currents. Some emphasized strict adherence to Jewish law. Others embraced a more universal message of grace and compassion. Then came the whispers of other narratives, accounts that challenged the dominant interpretations. These weren't heretical in the sense of rejecting core beliefs. Rather, they offered alternative perspectives on Jesus' life, ministry, and teachings. They often centered around women: Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Susanna, highlighting their roles as disciples and witnesses to his resurrection. These Gnostic Gospels, as they became known, presented a radically different picture of Jesus' message. They emphasized personal spiritual experience over ritual observance, focusing on inner transformation rather than outward conformity. Some depicted him as an enlightened teacher imparting esoteric knowledge, secrets revealed only to the initiated. Consider the Gospel of Thomas, a collection of sayings attributed to Jesus that bear little resemblance to those found in the canonical Gospels, or the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which portrays her as a key disciple, privy to profound revelations. These texts weren't condemned outright. They were simply overlooked, deemed less important or even contradictory by those shaping the emerging canon. The question wasn't just which stories belonged within the Bible, but how those stories were interpreted and understood. Early Christian communities wrestled with diverse perspectives on Jesus' identity, his mission, and the nature of salvation. Some embraced a more literal interpretation of Scripture, while others prioritized personal experience and intuition. The rise of Gnosticism, a philosophical movement emphasizing secret knowledge and spiritual enlightenment, further complicated matters. Gnostic Gospels often aligned with this worldview, offering alternative accounts of creation, humanity's relationship to God, and the path to salvation. These narratives challenged traditional theological assumptions, and presented a radically different understanding of reality. The process of canonization wasn't simply about selecting books. It was about establishing a framework for interpreting Scripture, a way of ensuring that all believers understood the core message of Christianity in a consistent manner. But this framework inevitably favored certain interpretations over others, silencing dissenting voices and shaping the narrative for centuries to come. Imagine a landscape shaped by shifting sands, where different paths converge and diverge. The canon of the Bible is like that landscape, a complex tapestry woven from diverse threads, each representing a unique perspective on the life and teachings of Jesus. It's a story not just told, but actively constructed, shaped by those who held power and determined which voices would be heard. What if the stories we consider foundational to our faith originated with those who were deliberately marginalized? And what does this tell us about the nature of truth itself? The shadows lengthen, revealing not a simple story of divine inspiration, but a complex negotiation of power and belief. The decisions surrounding the biblical canon weren't born solely from spiritual insight. They were profoundly influenced by political maneuvering and social dynamics within the early church. Rome itself exerted considerable pressure, seeking to standardize religious practice and quell potential dissent. The bishops of North Africa, particularly figures like Jerome, played a pivotal role in shaping the canon. They championed certain texts, while actively suppressing others, often citing concerns about heresy or inconsistency with established doctrine. Their actions weren't necessarily driven by malice, but rather by a desire to establish a unified Christian narrative, a shared foundation for faith across vast and disparate communities. However, this process of standardization came at a cost: the silencing of alternative voices and perspectives. The Gnostic Gospels, rich in their diverse interpretations of Jesus' teachings, were systematically excluded. Their emphasis on personal experience and spiritual enlightenment clashed with the more structured and ritualistic approach favored by many early Christians. It's crucial to understand that heresy wasn't always about outright contradiction. Sometimes, it was simply a difference in emphasis, a deviation from the perceived correct interpretation of Scripture. Those who challenged established authority were often branded as disruptive and dangerous, threatening the stability of the Church. Consider the concept of gnosis, knowledge, as it was understood during this period. It wasn't simply intellectual understanding. It encompassed a profound experiential awareness of God's presence within oneself and the world. Those who prioritized personal revelation over adherence to traditional doctrine were viewed with suspicion, their insights deemed unorthodox and potentially subversive. The canonization process reveals a delicate dance between faith, reason, and power. It wasn't a moment of unwavering certainty. Rather, it was an ongoing negotiation, a struggle to reconcile competing interpretations, and establish a framework for belief that would endure across generations. Imagine the weight of responsibility carried by those bishops, tasked with shaping the spiritual future of Christendom. They weren't simply preserving Scripture. They were constructing a narrative, a story that would define the identity of an entire civilization. Their choices, inevitably shaped by their own biases and perspectives, profoundly influenced the course of religious history. The absence of these lost Gospels isn't merely a historical footnote. It speaks to a fundamental tension within Christianity itself, the balance between tradition and innovation, dogma and experience. What remains unanswered is whether this deliberate suppression ultimately strengthened or diminished the faith, creating a monolith of belief or fostering a vibrant diversity of interpretation. Perhaps the greatest heresy was not questioning the text, but accepting it unquestioningly. The echoes of those silenced voices linger, a persistent reminder that the story of Christianity isn't a simple linear progression, but a complex and contested narrative. Examining the canon through this lens reveals not just what was included, but also what was deliberately excluded, a deliberate shaping of history based on specific agendas and priorities. Recent archaeological discoveries, fragments of papyrus containing portions of Gnostic texts unearthed in Egypt, offer tantalizing glimpses into these lost traditions. These aren't simply ancient relics, they represent a potential window into the diverse theological landscape of early Christianity, challenging our conventional understanding of its origins. The debate surrounding these fragments isn't about proving or disproving the existence of lost Gospels. Instead, it's about recognizing that the canon wasn't a final declaration but an ongoing process of refinement and revision, a constant negotiation between competing interpretations. Each discovery forces us to reevaluate our assumptions about what constituted orthodox belief at the time. Consider the philosophical underpinnings of Gnosticism. Its emphasis on inner knowledge, gnosis, as the pathway to salvation, contrasting sharply with the more outwardly focused emphasis on faith and good works prevalent in some early Christian communities. This divergence highlights a fundamental tension within Christianity itself, the pull between seeking external validation and embracing internal revelation. Furthermore, the suppression of these alternative narratives wasn't solely driven by religious dogma. Political considerations played a significant role. The desire to maintain unity among disparate communities, the potential for dissent to destabilize the church hierarchy, and the influence of Roman authorities seeking to control religious expression. It's tempting to view this historical process through a purely judgmental lens, to condemn those who excluded certain texts as narrow-minded or intolerant. However, it's crucial to acknowledge that they operated within a specific context, a world marked by uncertainty, competing ideologies, and profound social upheaval. Their decisions, while undoubtedly shaped by their own biases, were driven by a genuine desire to preserve the integrity of their faith. The very act of constructing a canon, of selecting which stories would be deemed worthy of preservation, is inherently an act of interpretation. It's a process of defining what is true, what is important, and what belongs within the shared narrative of a community. This raises fundamental questions about the nature of truth itself. Is it fixed and immutable, or is it constantly evolving through dialogue and reflection? Ultimately, the Forbidden Gospels serve as a potent reminder that the story of Christianity, like any grand historical narrative, is incomplete and contested. It's a story still being written, shaped by countless voices across time and space. What if acknowledging these suppressed narratives doesn't diminish our faith, but rather expands it, allowing us to embrace a richer, more nuanced understanding of Jesus' message and the diverse ways in which it has been interpreted throughout history? Perhaps the most profound heresy is not questioning the past, but failing to acknowledge its complexities. The weight of centuries settles into a quiet contemplation, not a definitive answer, but a persistent invitation to explore further. Examining the legacy of these suppressed narratives compels us beyond simple historical recitation and into a realm of profound philosophical inquiry. It's about recognizing that faith itself is an ongoing conversation, a continuous process of questioning and reinterpretation. The very act of seeking answers, of demanding transparency in religious history, represents a vital element of healthy spiritual practice. To accept the canon without critical reflection is to risk becoming complacent, passively accepting inherited narratives, without engaging with their complexities or challenging their assumptions. Consider the enduring power of metaphor within Christian theology, the image of light and darkness, of sheep and shepherd, of the seed and harvest. These metaphors, while seemingly simple, have been interpreted in countless ways throughout history, shaping theological doctrines, influencing social movements, and inspiring artistic expression. The Forbidden Gospels offer alternative interpretations of these foundational images, revealing a richness of meaning that might otherwise be overlooked. Perhaps the most significant takeaway isn't the specific content of these lost texts, but the method by which they were excluded, the deliberate shaping of a narrative to solidify power structures and maintain theological orthodoxy. This raises crucial questions about the role of authority in religious discourse. How do we balance respect for tradition with the need for critical inquiry? The echoes of dissenting voices continue to resonate, a chorus of alternative perspectives challenging the dominant interpretation of Christianity's past. These aren't simply historical anomalies. They represent a vital counterpoint to established narratives, reminding us that truth is rarely monolithic and often emerges from the margins. Imagine a world where all voices are heard, where diverse interpretations of Scripture are celebrated, not suppressed. Such a vision demands humility, a recognition that our own understanding of faith is always provisional and subject to revision. It requires an openness to alternative perspectives, a willingness to engage in respectful dialogue, and a commitment to questioning even the most deeply held beliefs. Ultimately, the Forbidden Gospels serve as a powerful reminder that Christianity's story isn't confined to the pages of its canonical texts. It's a story woven from countless threads, personal experiences, philosophical debates, social movements, and artistic expressions, each contributing to a complex tapestry of meaning. It is a narrative continually being written, shaped by those who dare to ask questions and challenge assumptions. Let us not seek definitive answers, but rather embrace the ongoing process of exploration, a journey guided by curiosity, humility, and a profound respect for for the diverse voices that have shaped Christianity's enduring legacy. The true heresy isn't to question faith, but to assume it has all been answered. This video has come to an end, but the discovery continues. Check out more content on the channel and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Thank you for watching.